Welcome to Care Less with Carly, the podcast for people who are done playing by their roles. I'm your host, Carly Lynn, and each week we'll cut through the noise with real talk, bold conversation, and expert insights to help you trade perfection for purpose and live life on your own terms. Welcome, everyone. Today I am sitting with the incredible Amina AlTai, a former marketing executive turned holistic leadership coach who helps entrepreneurs and leaders align their work with purpose, well-being, and their deepest values. After building a wildly successful career and unfortunately burning out in the process, Amina had a wake-up call that led her to completely reimagine her definition of success. Now she's on a mission to help others build careers rooted in joy, authenticity, and alignment. Amina, I can't even tell you how happy I am that you're here. This feels like a dream come true for me.
Oh my gosh, the dream is all mine. And congratulations on the podcast
Thank
launching.
you.
This is such a huge
Thank
deal.
you.
I'm honored to be a guest.
When we first connected, it was still just an idea floating around. And I remember our chat, and even in just the way you spoke about how passionate you were about your work, that was enough to signal in me like this exists and you can find this. So I want to jump in. I'm so excited you're here. And I know that you've said success that costs you your health or your authenticity isn't success at all. Can you take us back to the moment that really landed for you?
Yes. So the origin story is, you just alluded to it, but I was in my late 20s. I was 6 years into my marketing career, and I had that great on paper life, like the great title, and was really well liked and had all these achievements. And I had started to get really sick. And I'd been to about 7 different doctors. And then finally, I get a call from the seventh one who figures out what's going on with me. And that day, I happened to be driving to a client in Connecticut, and I get this call from her. And she says, Amina, if you don't go to the hospital now instead of going to your client, you'll be days away from multiple organ failure.
Oh my gosh, what a call to receive.
What a call to receive at 28, right? Absolutely a wake up call. And, I now call it my stop moment because it had me pause in my tracks and say, what are you doing in your life? The way that you've defined success, how you're moving through it doesn't serve you or anyone, anybody around you. And I had to choose another way. And so I went on my eat, pray, love year, as I call it, which ended up being 3 years basically while I was still working, but kind of getting all these tools to feel better in my own life, from coaching to mindfulness to somatics. And just after feeling so much better, I then went on to be trained in these methods because I figured I can't be the only one that's having these rock bottoms. And I wanted to mitigate the learning curve for people.
When you were in that moment before you got the call, what did life look like or feel like for you? Did you notice anything was off?
I don't think I lived in my body at that time in my life, because the funny thing is, I've only started sharing this part of the story very recently, but I didn't even go to the doctor after I got that call. I went to work and I spent the 8 hours there. And then at the end of the day, I was like, maybe I should go to the hospital, right? But I was so disconnected and so disembodied. And I lived so much in my head that these things didn't register. And so, yes, I had all of these symptoms. Like I had GI symptoms, my hair was falling out, I had brain fog, like all these symptoms. But I wasn't connecting the dots. I actually had zero idea that had anything to do with my definition of success or how I was working. I didn't know any of that. And so it took me years to kind of piece it together.
What was the Eat, Pray, Love chapter like? What was your goal in taking that time for you?
I mean, the Eat Pray chapter was like deeply messy and it was painful.
Was the goal to first work on your healing? But it sounds like you did a lot more healing than just the physical body.
Yes, the goal was to stop suffering, because I realized I was like, I feel like I'm suffering a lot, right? With physical health, emotionally speaking, I wasn't happy at the time by any stretch of the imagination. So the goal was, I don't want to suffer so much. And my roommate at the time, someone that she'd worked with, had gone to life coaching. And the minute she told me that, I was like, oh, I need some of that. It's like something in my body was like, yes. So I went to life coaching. And it was really interesting because this method, they have you look at 18 different areas of your life, from your body to your finances to your relationship with your parents, all of these things. And just coming out of, they called it the crash course weekend, coming out of the crash course weekend, I could see my traits and I could see where I was getting in my own way. And then that was such a turning point for me, because I was like, oh, I have some power here. I have some agency and control, and I can steer things in a different direction. But I think when you're that disconnected and that disembodied, it takes a minute for you to really start to steer the ship in a really different direction.
When you pursued coaching, was that to learn to be a coach or because you were looking for life coaching at
At
that time?
first, I was just looking for life coaching because I knew that I had gotten myself into a bit of a pickle and I needed to get out of my own way. And it was like years. My coach at the time kept saying, I think you're supposed to be a coach. And I was like, nope, don't like that word. Not going to do
What did
it.
you think about coaching at that time?
I mean, it had changed my life so much, but I still had this bias around it, right? Because it's a word that I think is quite loaded.
It
And
gets thrown around.
it does. And every profession has people that are doing work beautifully and people that are doing work in the shadows,
Yes.
let's say, right? And coaching tends to be one of those professions. And I think it's a bit of a bad rap. And so I'd seen a lot of that. And I was like, ugh, I'm connecting with the bad rap piece and I don't know if I want to go towards it. And I'd also really seen myself as a marketer, right? I had these dreams of being a CMO and that's what I thought my life was going to be. So I think that there was also releasing the old dream, the grief connected to it, all of it, and I wasn't ready for that. And so it was definitely a twisty journey. It was
Mhm.
definitely an unraveling that happened.
So it sounds like that was maybe step one of your transformation from that former career. And then it brought you into the coaching chapter, which is where we're meeting you now, and now a debut author.
Yes.
What were some of the self limiting beliefs or the most powerful changes that you've made along the way in relationship to that journey?
I think the biggest thing is just the story that I was telling myself about success, right? Is that you have to work so hard. You
Right.
have to squeeze every last drop of productivity out of yourself to be worthy. And that's what I lived into. And that's partly what sort of broke my body in lots of ways. And I really believe that our zones of genius and ease is the way forward, right? Like we're not meant to do everything. We are designed with a very particular type of genius, and that's our highest yield contribution. You don't need to be great at everything. You need to be
Mm.
great at the thing that you're great at
Right.
and spend time there, not everywhere else, right? But we all spend so much time laboring in these spaces that we're not designed for, and we make ourselves sick and we burn ourselves out. And I know that there's another way. Also, I started my career in 2007, so a year before the Great Recession. And for a lot of elder millennials, that also really cemented a belief system for us because it was this really precarious moment where so many people were out of jobs and the economy was so uncertain. And so people, I think of my generation of that era were like, okay, if you have a job, you're so lucky, you work so hard,
Right.
you don't rock the boat.
Sure.
And I think that that cemented a belief system for a lot of us.
It's a hustle culture. Like the
Yeah.
harder you're working, that is a path to success. But now, what we're here to talk about is that's a path
Right.
oftentimes to burnout or probably a slew of other negative outcomes that are not connected to living with what's really important to you.
Yes, I was giving a talk last night for the book and somebody was like, "Okay, but like let's be real, right? Like all of the great innovators of our time kind of churned and burned." And they named a litany of really successful humans. And then I was like, "And there's another side. There's all these other successful humans that we're not giving the same credit to, but have achieved the top of the mountain, but they didn't have to hurt themselves to get there.
Right.
Another way is possible for sure."
When you decided that you were ready to write this book, The Ambition Trap,
Mhm.
you were able to put into words what so many of us were feeling but weren't able to name. How did you know that it was time to write this book? And why did you choose The Ambition Trap as your debut?
It's so interesting. I honestly thought that this book was coming out a little late, if I'm being honest. So here's the story, the long story of the book. In 2019, I worked on a book proposal for a whole year with a book agent. And then fast forward to March of 2020, the first month of the pandemic, I get a call from my agent. She says, Amina, everything's so uncertain. I can't take a risk on a new author. This is where we part ways. And I cried for 3 days. And then Higher Self came in and was like, you know what? This work is still becoming. It's not what it's meant to be yet. It's still like maturing and
Mm.
nurturing. And then fast forward to later that year in 2020, at the height of the social justice uprisings, I ended up coaching a handful of celebrity girl bosses who were canceled. And I'm very
Okay.
clear that my book is not an analysis of cancel culture at all, but it was elucidating these patterns around ambition that were alive in my life, that were alive in my clients' lives. So it really cemented this framework. And for 2 years, I was just sitting on this framework, teaching it to my clients.
Mhm.
And then in 2022, one of my clients was like, "Where's your book? Like, this needs to be a book." And I was
Right.
like, "Well, funny you should ask." And then she introduced me to my agent, and then we sold the book in first week of market, and kind of the rest is history. So there was a part of me that felt like it was ready to be out earlier, but everything is divine timing.
There's a couple of themes that I really want to talk about. You break down the different types of ambition,
Mhm.
which I found really fascinating. Can you walk us through what those types are and how listeners might identify which one they're working from?
Yes. So I talk about two types of ambition, and I coined these terms. There's either painful ambition, which is driven by our core wounds, or there's purposeful ambition, which is connected to our deeper sense of why. And so there are five core wounds, and they are rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And
Mm,
we have one, two, three, or all five of them.
sure.
And, I always say this because I think sometimes people feel bad about it. They feel bad that they have wounds or that
Right.
it means something about their families. It doesn't. It is a very human rite of passage to have a core wound. And we can get them on the playground or even vicariously, right? It says nothing about our families.
Mhm.
So we all have one, two, three, or all five of these wounds. And as a result of the wounds, we wear a corresponding mask. So if you have a betrayal wound, the mask you wear is control. If you have a
Mm,
rejection wound, the mask you wear is avoidance. And so, for example, with avoidance, right, you're avoiding throwing your hat in the ring for the promotion because there's a part of you that's afraid of being rejected.
mm.
Or if you're with the control mask, this was one of mine, you'll control every last thing, every last detail because you don't trust other people to rise to the occasion. And you can imagine if you build your ambition upon that, only so long before the house of cards comes tumbling down.
What would you advise for listeners to do to start trying to figure out what their wounds are, other than read the book,
Yeah.
of course? But is there any self reflection or introspection, a prompt that might give listeners some signal where they fall?
Yeah, well, as a coach, it felt so important to put so many exercises in the book because I didn't want people to just intellectualize the concept
Right,
and not live into it and
right.
not experience it in their bodies. So there's an exercise in the book that helps you identify which wounds are yours, which masks are yours. Some people don't connect with the wounds, but they connect with the masks. They're like, oh, I don't know about rejection, but avoidance, ooh, that's me.
Mm,
Or I don't know about betrayal, but oh, yes, control, that's my thing.
right.
So, whichever way you find your way in, I want you to find your way in. And sometimes it's helpful to get to the origin story of where that came from, and sometimes it's not.
Mm,
So, I don't want people to hyper focus on where it originated. It's not always helpful.
right.
But where is it alive in your life? And what does that younger version of you need so that it can release this or this lifeboat that it's using right now that doesn't serve you anymore?
Do you often find with your clients that the wounds or the masks show up in other places outside of just their job or their careers?
Yes, 100%. So, you were
Okay.
at my book launch,
Yes.
and I was
It
interviewed
was
by, you're
amazing.
so
I mean, I was
lovely.
such a superstar.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you for being there. But my best friend was on stage with me, and somebody asked the question of like, well, does this framework work outside of work? Absolutely, right?
Mm,
So my friend and I were talking about how I have a rejection wound, so I'm a recovering avoidant. And she has an abandonment wound, so she's
right.
recovering dependent, right? So what that looks like in our relationship is classic anxious avoidant dynamic. And so we work together so diligently to make sure that we don't activate each other. It's honestly been like the biggest healing relationship for both of us.
I also think that asking a trusted community or the people around you who are close to give you feedback
Mhm.
on how you're showing up in certain areas can also be helpful if you don't know already where to start.
Yeah.
Some people might be hearing what you're saying and thinking, oh, I kind of connect to that. Maybe I'm struggling in the romantic part of my life, or I am struggling to express my needs, whatever it is. And sometimes I think it's easier when you get feedback from close, trusted friends too.
100%.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
I wanted to ask you about the performing success and how we can catch ourselves in that loop of performing out of a place of fear rather than
Mhm.
intention.
Yes. So in the book, I talk about the difference between passion, performance, and purpose. And performance is an act, right? How
Yeah.
well we can perform a task, but it's an act. So it often necessitates that we wear a mask and that we're
Right.
not ourselves. And so many of us, particularly in high performance spaces, are
Mm,
obsessed with this performance. But I think underneath it, we really need to connect with the purpose piece, the why. And one of my favorite definitions of purpose is to bring forth the best that is within you. And I add it in any given moment because it is so situational. So instead of like, well, how can I act and put on the mask and the performance to entertain all these people and do all the things outside of myself, how can I come back to my bigger why and bring forth the best that's within me in this moment? And in the book, there's a 5-part framework to help you tap into purpose. And so I think that we get on the court with our purpose when we're connected to our zone of
mm.
genius, when we are living our values, when we're clear on the impact that we want to have and we're initiating that impact, when our needs are met, and when
Mhm.
we are cultivating a sense of contentment. And when we've checked the box on all five of those areas, or we're checking the box on all five of those areas, we're living more purposefully versus in the performance.
What are some of the ways that a listener might know they're living in alignment compared to when they're not? What are some of the body symptoms or the way things might be showing up in their life. I'm just imagining maybe people are hearing this type of thoughtful perspective for the first time.
Mhm.
So, how would they know?
Yeah, I love this question. So going back to my origin story and when I first started life coaching for myself, I remember asking my coach at the time of, "Hey, like how do you know when it's your intuition speaking? Like how do you know what that
Mm.
voice sounds
Yes.
like?" And
Yes.
my coach at the time was like, "Oh my God, this poor child." Like she's so
But
disconnected.
so many of us live in that. We look to the external for feedback on how we're doing, which is something that I think we're taught as we grow up.
Exactly. The first thing for me was really understanding all the different voices that we have because we all are an amalgamation of all these different voices that are different
Mm.
ages and come from different emotion states.
Yes.
So for me, I was a very anxious person. So I started by asking myself, is this the voice of anxiety or is this the voice of fear? Right. So can I at least separate out those two and then hear my true self? So if there
Mm.
is a particular emotion state that you find yourself in, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's doubt, maybe it's worry, start by asking yourself, like, is this the voice of worry? Is this the voice of fear? Because then you
Mm.
can clarify and distinguish that from the voice of intuition.
I know you work with a lot of very high level executives and senior leadership. Are there any themes that you've noticed that come up consistently in people who are at the top of their game, but still questioning if they're doing the right thing?
Yeah, it shocks me to my core every time because I'll be sitting across from Fortune 100 leaders, amazing CEOs, Olympic gold medalists, and literally they will say to me, I don't have a zone of genius. Like, I'm not gifted at something. And I'm like, about to fall off
What do
my
you say? What do you say?
I'm like, "Are you kidding? Like, do you not see what I see?"
Right.
And my job as an executive coach is to kind of hold up the mirror and reflect back. And ultimately has to come from them, right? But so many of them discount their gifts. And that's
Mm.
also what I wanted to course correct in the book is we have this idea that genius looks a very particular way, that
Mhm.
it's like Einstein and high IQ and all the things. But the reality is each and every one of us has genius.
Yes.
And the world is a better place when we each live into our own. And also everything becomes so much less competitive.
Sure.
We stop looking outside of ourselves. We're not as scarcity driven because we realize like your gift is different to my gift. And those two gifts together, magical.
Right.
And so one of the first things that we'll work on is really unearthing and owning what their gifts and zones
Mm,
of genius
mm.
are.
That's such a beautiful way to talk about it. I know even in my personal experience, when I was considering launching and feeling intimidated, and sometimes I would see how far along other people were,
Mhm.
and I eventually just thought to myself, what if I'm seeing how far other people are in this process because that signals to me it's possible.
I love
Instead
that.
of thinking in a competitive
Mhm.
or a way that made me feel bad or like I should stop, I thought, oh, look, they've done this. Now I know it's real. It's interesting to hear how, even at senior levels or at an Olympic level, people are still doubting if they're really doing the right
It's
thing.
wild to me. It's wild. But you know what I love? I love seeing you in your
Mm,
genius.
thank
And,
you.
it can be so easy to say, well, everyone's doing this thing, right? But even in this conversation, you're asking me such different questions than other people have asked me, which
Oh,
signals to me that you're really in a space that is aligned with your gift.
well, thank you. Means a lot. My why for this podcast and for the name Care Less
Mhm.
is because the journey that I'm on and maybe some of you are on is unlearning
Mhm.
that success is supposed to feel a certain way or
Yeah.
look a certain way. And that's scary.
It
It's
is.
scary and it also feels so electric.
Yeah. Well, fear and anxiety are the same as excitement, right? It's
Right.
like
Right.
our bodies knows that we're going to the edge, we're going to a growth edge, and it's signaling something, and often an awakening. But sometimes we take it to mean dial it back down. But
Right.
it's a great signal.
If there's listeners who are potentially also in a similar space where they're feeling disconnected from purpose or looking for purpose, is there any quick framework or exercise, maybe from the book or something that you do with clients that you could recommend as just a quick starting point?
Yes, so there is a nice deep dive exercise around unearthing purpose because I think we hear that word and it's so big and so heavy,
Yeah.
and we feel like we have to commit to this thing for a lifetime. In the book, I talk about my friend Michael Ventura, he uses the term a constellation of purpose. And I love that so much because we think that there's a singular North Star, but that's so much pressure. Maybe it made sense hundreds of years ago when we lived until we were 30. So then we had one career. And so it makes sense that our careers are evolutionary. And so the idea that it has to be singular, I think, can be hard. And so follow the constellation versus the single North Star.
Mhm.
But there is a great exercise on finding purpose in the book, and it's that 5-part framework that I mentioned earlier. And so it starts with understanding your zones of genius, like as we talked about before. And one thing that you all can do today is that you can ask 3 people that really see you fully, and see you fully is the operative phrase here because a lot of people will project. So
Mhm.
find the true people, right? And ask them what they think your gifts are. And
Mm.
they might say slightly different versions of the same thing, and just look for the through line. That's a great place to start
Sure.
today.
When you were considering writing the book in 2019, did you face any self-limiting beliefs?
Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. When we were working on the proposal, I was so gung ho. I was really excited about it. Then we took the book to market and we had all these meetings in the first week. And then my agent calls and she was like, they want to make a preempt offer, which is basically they want to give you a big offer so that you take it off the table so nobody else could bid against it. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Then they give me the offer. We negotiated a little bit. And then finally they're like, okay, this is done. And I remember getting off that call and my heart racing and not quite having a panic attack, but feeling extremely unqualified.
Mm,
And my first thought was, my teacher should get to do this. She should go first. And she'd already written her own book, right? Like,
sure.
and she wasn't worried about us being competitor or anything like that. But the story that I was telling myself was that I am not allowed. Somebody else needs to
Mm.
go before me. And it's a bit of a story of a lifetime kind of. I'm the second child. And so I had this story about I'm always number 2. That's
Mm.
just my role.
Someone goes first.
Exactly. Somebody always goes first, and it's not me. And so that came up again. And then I immediately called my EMDR therapist and was like, we need an urgent session. We need to rewire this right now. And she walked me off the ledge. But yeah, I totally panicked.
So you were feeling, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, I don't want to project, but you were just feeling like maybe somebody else should write your book before you do.
Right. And you know what is so wild? Because I talk about the intersection of ambition and identity a whole lot, and nobody else is really talking about that.
Mm,
And my book has a lot of personal story, a lot of client stories. And as I got into the work and as I was writing my way into the book, I was like, oh, I'm actually the perfect person to write this book. I am the
right.
walking ambition trap. Like, I needed
Yeah.
to write this book, and all the pieces kind of added up by the end.
Right, right. I mean, how does it feel to look at the book and know that you created this and you poured so many important ideas into something that is tangible that people can hold and read and share?
Yeah, it feels really special. And, one of the things that I was so excited about with writing a book is that I've always, like, I love depth and intimacy, and that's not
Yes.
available everywhere, right? Sometimes it's hard to really kind of descend from the rind
Yes.
into the pit, as Rumi says. And so I was like, oh, this is so great. In the book, I can go really deep. But even then, I was like, oh, there's places, and we made so many cuts. I had like 50 drafts of this book. There were so many places where I wanted to go deeper and couldn't. And so it's really interesting to have this body of work and be like, oh, I can point to things in totality and also still there's more. But it's
Mm.
very special to have something out in the world that's tangible. And also, I don't know if you feel this way, but I'm a Scorpio and I'm like an onion. There's so many layers, you know what I
Oh, yeah.
mean? And I think it's like, as humans, we are prisms, right? And in one interaction, this point of the prism might come to the surface, right?
Yes.
In another interaction, this point of the prism may come to the surface. But I do feel like it is complex and challenging to have all the prisms present at once, if that
Right.
makes sense. But a book feels like an opportunity for that.
Yes.
So,
And the other thing, as you talked about before with the constellation analogy, is we're ever changing.
yes.
So even when you think you've peeled back one layer, that layer is a different color now or a different shape
Yes.
or texture than it was a couple of months or years ago. So
Exactly.
I would be curious if you could talk about what the role of rest is in relationship to ambition.
Yeah, it's huge. So, literally in the introduction, I didn't want to waste any time getting to this point. I talk about how we live in a culture that thinks that ambition is more for more's sake all the time.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it goes in cycles like a perennial flower. So we have this seedling of desire. I want to grow. And we nurture our inner and outer environment and we grow. So, like, writing the book process was the growth process. And we have this momentary peak in the sun where the petals come out and it's fabulous. And then the winds change and the weather changes and the petals fall off and you wind down and you go back underground and you rest there
Mm.
until you're nurtured enough to take aim again.
Right.
So, ambition to me is about pacing, rest, recovery, and growth, like
Right.
all of those
Right.
things.
And you can't have a prosperous long term career without all of those.
Exactly.
You can't always be creating and always be building and expect that there's no sense of rest and recovery because that's also where the growth happens.
Yes, I use a lot of examples in the book around high performance athletes and Olympians because I do feel like high achievers in the workplace are like, okay, fine, we can trust those people. They're at the top of their game.
Sure.
And I talk about how Olympians use sleep coaches, what is lovingly known or jokingly referred to as sleep doping, because they recognize how important sleep and recovery is to high performance,
Yes.
right? Training days are important, rest days are important, race day is important, but you need the rest in
Right.
order to show up fully on race day. And I also argue that boredom is really important. It's so important to sit and do nothing
Right.
and allow the divine intervention to come through
Yes.
of what is next versus trying to stuff the space always.
Yes.
Boredom is a really powerful tool.
Because boredom is equivalent to spaciousness, right?
Exactly.
When you're bored, there's the capacity for like a divine message. Just, boop.
Exactly.
Oh, I actually realized while I gave myself an afternoon to just be that I really love this thing.
Yeah.
But how often are we so busy that we don't have a second to think about anything outside of what is directly in front of us? So I love the advice of being bored. And before we close, I do want to zoom in and just get a little more sense of what's present in your world. Are you motivated to keep pushing this out, or are you almost ready for some rest?
Yes, definitely. All of those things, actually. So the feeling that I felt when the book came out, literally the day that it came out, was just like massive relief and release.
Yeah.
Because for 3 years I was working on this
Wow.
book, and you hold it in behind the scenes and you can allude to bits and pieces here and there, but you can't give it away, right?
Right.
And so it felt like, oh my gosh, I can finally let my shoulders down. I have this huge sigh of relief because you all now can get on the journey with
Yes.
me. And it just felt so incredible. It was too much for me to hold at the end
Sure.
almost. And the last month, so it's officially, I think we're coming up on 5 weeks of it being out in the world. And I've been on my book tour. I've done almost 25 events in the last 5 weeks.
Wow.
And so it's a lot.
Yes.
And it's been amazing. And I loved the momentum. I've loved being out there. I've loved talking about it. And it taps into another zone of genius that's been electrifying. So it's been absolutely incredible. But I do feel ready to go underground and rest.
I mean, 25 events, that's a lot. That's just,
Yeah.
it's a lot of energy outpour, a lot of meeting people. But I'm sure, you also need to like go to a yoga class
Of
or like have
course.
dinner with a friend or just
Yeah.
sleep in your own bed.
And I will say that I was honestly a little concerned for myself. I was like, 25 events in 5 weeks. I love my alone time.
Right.
I would identify as an ambivert. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I was like, how's she going to do it? But I have felt so fed by the interactions because I was in an ivory tower by myself for so long, where just talking to myself about these concepts, you know what I mean? So I had no idea if they were resonating.
Yes.
And now that they're finally out in the world, I'm getting feedback and it's really feeding me.
Yeah. And like we were talking about before we started, when you speak, there's such a deep sense of connection to your work. I was saying it's like a channel. Like you speak from a place of such alignment that
Thank you.
is really inspirational because
you.
that's how you know there's no blockage there. You're doing the work that you were put here to do. And I'm just so grateful that you've set an example for myself and for listeners of what it can look like.
Thank you for those beautiful words. I feel that right in my heart center. Thank
Well,
you.
I mean it. I have 3 last questions, quickies.
Okay.
Rapid fire questions.
do it.
In what's one bold decision you made that changed everything, even though it scared the hell out of you at the time?
So somebody called out, they were like, I noticed in the acknowledgments you thanked yourself. I've never seen anyone do that before. And I was like, yeah, I thanked all the younger version of myself that felt brave enough and courageous enough to go to therapy for the first time, to choose life coaching, to choose to change careers. Like all of that was so, you just put yourself out in the biggest way. It's so courageous.
It's courageous. Yes. In one word, what does success mean to you now?
Joy.
Joy. That was
Yeah.
an easy one. And if there's one word that you would share as a gift to our listeners, what would that word be?
So the word that I would offer you is contentment. So many of us are chasing happiness, and I talk about this in the book,
Yes,
but
I
happiness is an
remember.
emotion and it's transient. We're not meant to grip onto it, and trying to grip onto it is making us really miserable. And so my invitation to you all is to cultivate a sense of contentment, which means unconditional wholeness, that regardless of what's happening around us, we know inside of ourselves we are unconditionally whole.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your light with me. Thank you for sharing the mic with me. You are incredible, and I'm so inspired by
It means
this.
so much. especially coming from you. So our listeners will follow you
On Instagram at Amina AlTai. I'm sure the spelling will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
My website, aminaaltai.com. And we have a book page that lists all upcoming events as well. And the book is available everywhere you buy books, whether that's your favorite indie bookstore, national chain, or Audible. And I read the audiobook too.
That's so special. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has lit me up in all of the ways.
Oh my gosh, right back at you.
I'm so excited to see what comes next after your rest.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in to Care Less with Carly. If this episode resonated with you or reminded you to stop living by someone else's rules, I would love to hear about it. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, leaving a quick review means the world and helps more people find the show. If there's a guest you'd love to hear from, DM me their name at Care Less with Carly on Instagram or drop me a comment. I'm always looking for powerful, honest voices to bring into this space. Until next time, you got this. Keep caring less about what others think and more about what makes you come alive.